In the beginning of the year 8 BCE, Augustus once again crossed the Pomerium into Rome, approaching the Senate and accepting his proconsular imperium with another reluctant performance. The death of Drusus had left Augustus despondent. His long life was a blessing for its time, but one that saw the death of his sons, his supporters, and his friends. Of those that remained were his stepsons and adopted children, Tiberius, a stern and boorish disciplinarian, as well as Gaius and Lucius Caesar, two spoiled and untested children. Left with no other heirs, it would be these three unlikely candidates who would take on Augustus's mantle in the provinces. Welcome to our latest video on the Julio-Claudian dynasty of Rome, in which we will cover the twilight years of Rome's first emperor and his response to crises on the vast frontiers of his empire, from Judea to Armenia to Germania. Every week we release 3 new exclusive videos for our members and patrons. The Pacific War, the Eastern Front of World War II Prelude, and many other series, including the War of Spanish Succession, Punic Wars, Iberian Reconquista, Russian Revolution and Civil War, North African and Italian campaigns of World War II, and much more. It has been long overdue, but we have finally created a YouTube channel exclusively for our Kings and Generals podcasts. Please go and check out Kings and Generals podcast, home to the Pacific War Week by Week podcast and the Fall and Rise of China podcast, link in the description and pinned comment. To see those, as well as get access to our exclusive Discord, see our schedule, and get early access to all videos, join the ranks of our patrons and YouTube members via the links in the description and pinned comment. Thanks to our supporters for allowing us to continue doing our dream job. Despite Drusus's sudden death, the majority of the Germanic world saw fit to maintain peace with the Romans. Tiberius, now the only man Augustus could truly rely on, was sent north to the Rhine, while Augustus himself presided over a massive conference consisting of envoys from every tribe in the Romans' newly acquired province of Germania. There was but one exception, the Sicambri, who the Romans required to be present and part of the negotiations, and whose diplomats were sent late to the symposium. With none of his old Republican companions to assuage his fury, Augustus ordered the late arrivals imprisoned and the Sicambri's hostages killed in response. Now in a state of war, Tiberius led the army across the Weser and subdued the Sicambri once more, capturing their king Melo. However, the Roman punishment seems to have been conciliatory. The Sicambri finally received the conditions they had originally sought, and 40,000 of them were resettled on the Roman side of the Rhine in Belgica. More than that, Tiberius proved his competence as an organizer and logistician, making various moves to consolidate Roman power in Germania. He abandoned the forward operating base of Oberadin and re-established it at Haltern, where supplies and reinforcements could be dispatched more quickly from the Rhine. Having secured a lasting peace with a cautious, conciliatory but effective strategy on the Rhine, Augustus lauded his stepson. Tiberius was allowed to be acclaimed imperator alongside Augustus, and granted a triumph in Rome, and designated consul for the following year. Unfortunately for Augustus, Tiberius's ambitions were about to take a counterproductive turn. The next year proved to be uneventful, but for a brief sojourn by Tiberius in Germania, of which the details are lost. Such a quiet year proved beneficial for Augustus's image. Tiberius had promised to restore the Temple of Concord, so Drusus's name could be inscribed upon it, and Augustus was able to close the doors of the Temple of Janus for a third time. Having proven himself reliable time and again in Raetia, Illyricum and Germania, Augustus renewed Tiberius's tribunician power for another 5 years and ordered him to Armenia. Trouble on Rome's eastern border was brewing, as the Armenian king Tigranes III had died and had been replaced by a Parthian puppet, Tigranes IV. Before he could depart for Armenia, Tiberius made a sudden decision to retire from public life, which Augustus forbade in a show before the Senate. Tiberius went on a hunger strike for 4 days before Augustus ultimately acquiesced and allowed him to retire to Rhodes with his astrologer Thrasyllus. Ancient and modern scholars have no certain explanation for Tiberius's decision, with claims ranging from resenting the preferential treatment of Lucius and Gaius Caesar to wanting to escape his wife Julia's conduct and reputation without the disgrace of a divorce. Whatever the case, Augustus was left feeling betrayed and alone. His ally and staunch Republican Maecenas had perished 2 years prior, and Statilius Taurus was ailing in his advanced age. He also faced a shortage of competent military commanders, having been forced to reduce the length of the consulship through voluntary resignations of each appointee. in order to create more qualified men for service as military and administrative legati. He was forced to turn to his teenage grandsons, Gaius and Lucius Caesar, and hoped they would prove capable of performing the tasks and responsibilities before them. Gaius Caesar had already experienced conditions in the field while serving under Tiberius in 8 BCE, albeit he had no command experience. In 5 BCE, Gaius finally turned 15 and entered the age of manhood, donning the toga virilis and being appointed to the honorific post of Princeps Ioventutis, or First of the Youth. This post placed him in charge of one of the 4 termae of youths, and required him to prepare them for the Transvectio Equitum display, giving him badly needed experience in horsemanship, logistics, and leadership. Hopefully it would propel him on a course to become an effective military commander. In the interim, Augustus had to rely on his legati to handle developments on the eastern frontier. Publius Sulpicius Quirinius, Legatus Augusti pro praetore of Galatia and Pamphylia, was tasked to lead 2 legions against major banditry in central Anatolia. An established but reliable legatus named Publius Quinctilius Varus was then in charge of Syria when King Herod died in 4 BCE. A well-known figure even in the modern day, Herod had been the model of a Roman client king, but the terms of his will proved to be inflammatory to the regions of Judea and Palestina. Herod had left vast sums of cash reserves at multiple temples and palaces across his realm, a significant portion of which he bequeathed to the Romans. This did not sit well with the Jews and other indigenous Palestinians who viewed the Roman acquisition of these sums as the looting of their cities and wealth. Herod Archelaus, his son and primary successor, faced riots almost immediately upon his accession to the post of Tetrarch. As the crowds grew in number over the course of Passover, Herod Archelaus attempted to have the local Roman tribune with his cohort of auxiliaries subdue the crowd without bloodshed, but the rioters pelted and killed the soldiers with stones, forcing Herod and the Romans to flee. Instead, he returned with his army and slaughtered the rioters, temporarily quelling the unrest but setting the stage for escalated violence. Herod Archelaus sent for the assistance of Varus, who was accompanied to Herod's new port of Caesarea by Procurator of Syria Sabinus, who sought to recover the amassed stores of wealth Herod had bequeathed to Augustus. Varus moved quickly to Jerusalem, where he garrisoned the legion he had brought from Syria and restored order. After Varus returned to Antioch, Sabinus proceeded to the city against Varus's instructions and attempted to pry open the doors of the city treasuries in the palace and temple. Incensed by his actions, the populace from towns around Jerusalem came to the city to join in the riots, leading to a fight in the temple between the Romans and the dissidents. Sabinus directed his men from the tallest of the city's defensive towers, who began to slaughter the crowd. The locals were outmatched, but they managed to outmaneuver the Romans instead, hurling stones and javelins from the temple's upper levels and lighting fires in surrounding buildings. Many citizens and Roman soldiers were trapped and died in the ensuing blaze, and the crowd laid siege to the city with the help of defectors from Herod Archelaus' army. Sabinus, the Romans, and the core of Herod's army were trapped, and messengers were rushed to Varus for aid. Revolts erupted across the province. At Idumea, 2,000 of Herod's veterans reformed their unit and attacked Archelaus' army. Eudes, the son of a notorious bandit named Hezekias, broke into the armory at Sepphoris and looted its stores, attacking loyalists across the region. At Perea and Emmaus, 2 men named Simon and Anthrongeos attempted to usurp the throne. Varus was incensed, amassing an army of 2 legions and 4 cavalry alae to put down the rebellion. En route, Varus picked up 1,500 veterans who voluntarily re-enlisted, and an additional force of Arabian allies under a certain Aretus. He split his forces, sending his commander Gaius to Sepphoris to raise the city and slay the bandits of Eudes. At the same time, Varus himself passed through the loyal city of Samaria and sent Aretus to raise the nearby village of Sampho. Varus proceeded to Emmaus to crush Athrongeus' usurpation, who ordered the town set ablaze. Turning towards Jerusalem, the rebels quickly dispersed into the mountains before his arrival, allowing Varus to relieve the beleaguered inhabitants. Rounding up the rioters, he placed most in his custody and crucified 2,000 of the most troublesome instigators. Despite his rapid success, the situation was not yet resolved, as a significant force of 10,000 rebels was still operating at Idumea. Furthermore, the Arabians of Aretus were waging a private war of retribution against the locals in response to various injustices committed against them by the late Herod. Varus recalled Aretas and sent his men into the countryside, offering mass clemency to all but the leaders of the revolt, who were shipped to Rome and tried before Augustus. Surprisingly, Augustus also showed mercy to all those who had not been members of Herod's family. The tumult was finally quelled, and Varus returned to Antioch with most of his forces. While 3 BCE was a quiet year, 2 BCE opened with a momentous and spontaneous accolade hoisted upon Augustus, when the Senate, led by Valeria Messala Messallinus, voted to grant him the appellation of Pater Patriae, or Father of the Fatherland. Augustus also held the consulship for the 13th time, continuing to rapidly cycle both distinguished families and novi homines through the consulship to keep the roster of eligible officers and administrators full. Augustus's other grandson, Lucius Caesar, also came of age that year. He was appointed Princeps Ioventutis and also made an augur, and was tasked with organizing the year's Lusus Troiae with Gaius Caesar, his brother. The massive Forum Augusti, one of Rome's most spectacular sites, was finally dedicated in this year, albeit it was not quite yet complete. Augustus and his grandsons presided over the opening ceremony and dedication of the military standards in the Temple of Mars Ultori, offering animal sacrifices and then hosting a massive display of games for the city's population in the Circus Flaminius, including a massive beast hunt, gladiatorial games, and a mock naval battle. The day ended with Gaius Caesar's departure for the Danube, where he was expected to learn to command Roman armies in the field. However, Cassius Dio remarks that Gaius learned little more than how to delegate command, showing no valor or competency himself. This was a serious problem for Augustus, as tensions with Parthia were on the rise, and he needed serious, competent commanders who could meet the Parthian armies in battle and come out the other side. His thinly stretched government was about to be tested. In 1 BCE, a revolt instigated by the Parthians overthrew Artavasdes III and installed Tigranes IV, destabilizing the eastern frontier. Too old to lead armies in the field himself, and without Agrippa or Tiberius to impress upon the Parthians with their imposing presence, Augustus turned to his grandson, hoping it would have the same effect. Gaius Caesar was appointed Orienti Praepositus, and voted the former Tiberius's proconsular imperium by the Senate. He was also made consul designate for the next year, despite being significantly underaged for the position. In order to compensate for his military inexperience, several of Augustus's experienced commanders were sent with him to Armenia. Marcus Lollius and Publius Sulpicius Quirinius were to be his military attachés, and Lucius Aelius Sienus was sent with a detachment of the Praetorian Guard. Arriving on the frontier in 1 CE, the Parthian king Phraticles dispatched envoys to Augustus with a letter to negotiate a settlement. However, Augustus and Phraticles' exchange proved hostile and unfruitful, full of passive-aggressive language and diplomatic slights. The peace negotiation instead took a different turn when the Parthians' candidate Artabazus suddenly became ill and died, prompting the Roman hostage Tigranes IV to petition Augustus for a bid to take the Armenian throne. Augustus quickly ferried Tigranes off to Armenia with high hopes that it would resolve the situation, and Phraticles entered into more amiable negotiations with Augustus. Phraticles withdrew the Parthian army and agreed to recognize Tigranes IV on the condition that Tigranes' brothers were kept outside of Armenia. Phraticles also revealed Lollius to be a traitor who proceeded to take his own life. With the frontier seemingly in order, Gaius Caesar's letter reached Rome, where the Senate proclaimed him imperator for a 15th time for his bloodless victory. This would prove to be apprehensive, as the sudden ambush and death of Tigranes IV by unidentified barbarians sent the region spiraling back into a crisis. Succeeding Tigranes IV, the Roman nominee Ariobarzanes II was widely disliked by the Armenians, who rose in revolt against his coronation. The revolt of 2 CE was probably incensed by the Parthians and forced Gaius Caesar to cross the Euphrates into Armenia. His forces advanced to Artageria and laid siege, remaining there over the winter into 3 CE. The story of the siege is uncertain, as the primary sources have conflicting accounts. The Armenian commander, named Adon or Donis in different versions of the story, was allegedly loyal to either the old Armenian king or the Parthian king Phraticles, and would not surrender the city. In some accounts, he allegedly lured Gaius Caesar into negotiations to betray the city and its treasury to him, only to wound him in a double cross. Adon then either threw himself onto a pyre, fell on his sword, or retreated to the city for the siege, depending on the author. The siege was long, and when the Romans finally took the city, they pulled down its walls to ensure it could not defend itself against them again. The sacking of Artageria ended the revolt, and the Romans installed Ariobarzanes II as their puppet ruler, only for him to suddenly die as well. Fortunately, the Romans had another replacement waiting in the wings, the young Artabazos, who was crowned soon after. Unfortunately for Augustus's grandsons, their fate was to live similarly short lives to the Armenian successors. Lucius Caesar had set out for his first military post in Spain in 2 CE, only to suddenly fall ill and die during a stop along the coast at Massalia. Gaius Caesar, wounded during the siege of Artageria, also suffered from illness and infection afterwards. Cassius Dio says Gaius Caesar had never been of a particularly robust constitution and became delirious due to a fever. He sent a letter to his grandfather begging to also enter private life like Tiberius, to which Augustus reluctantly conceded. In the interim, his chief military advisor, Quirinius, was appointed Legati Augusti Praetori of Syria, replacing Varus, and began withdrawing the Roman army from Armenia as ailing Gaius Caesar boarded a ship bound for Rome. His condition quickly worsened, and he died on the 21st of February during a stop at Limyra in Lycia, much like his brother and Drusus before him. Rome once again entered a period of mourning. A state funeral was held, and Gaius's ashes were carried into the mausoleum of Augustus and placed alongside his brothers. Both boys' silver-gilt spears and shields were placed on display at the Curia Iulia. Augustus could not grieve, however, as Rome's next generation of military leaders had perished. He had to move quickly and looked to his stepson Tiberius, whom he adopted as his direct successor, with the requirement that Germanicus, Tiberius' son, be adopted in turn. Tiberius responded positively to this news, and in 4 CE he left his estate in Rhodes to return to public life, with his tribunician power restored. Tiberius' comeback had come in the nick of time, as the Roman province of Germania was once more in turmoil. The province, in which the Romans had been constructing markets and other amenities for the past decade, now faced another mass revolt from Rome's former Germanic allies. Tiberius advanced to the border, where he was warmly greeted by the Evocati, the old veterans who had remained in service since his previous tenure, and then launched an aggressive campaign following Drusus's first expedition in 12 BCE. The Cananephates, Bructeri, Utori, and Cherusci were all quickly subdued, as Tiberius advanced over the Weser and to the source of the Lippe, where he established a new legionary fortress at Anrapen. The conflict lasted unusually late into December, with Tiberius possibly reaching as far east as Paderborn before returning briefly to Rome. The opening of 5 CE saw a similarly offensive stance, where Tiberius crossed the Elbe and subdued the Chauci, Langobardi, Semnones, and Hermanduri. Retiring for the winter, Tiberius broke new ground at Marktbreit and Carnuntum in preparation to continue further east, surpassing his brother Drusus with the conquest of the Marcomanni, who had moved to the region of the modern Czech Republic. Tiberius, however, would soon be forced to turn his attention away from Germania and back to the empire. In the Roman provinces of Illyricum and Dalmatia, public discontent with the Roman legate was about to boil over into the largest revolt Augustus would face. Next time, we'll face down the Great Illyrian Revolt, considered by the Romans to be their greatest threat since Hannibal himself. If you don't want to miss that and many other historical videos, make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see them. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Recently, we've started releasing weekly Patreon and YouTube member exclusive content. Consider joining their ranks via the link in the description or button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.